The moon had been dead for 10,000 years, and that was exactly why the compact chose it. No sun reached its surface. No signal escaped its shadow. It was the perfect place to hide something that was never supposed to exist. Deep inside the black site station buried in the moon's frozen crust, a glass tank hummed with pale blue light. Inside it floated something that was not quite a man and not quite a monster, suspended in fluid, its chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths that no machine had programmed it to take. Dr. Mara Voss pressed her palm against the cold glass and stared at the thing floating inside it, and for the 100th time, she asked herself how she had ended up here. 6 months ago, she had been cataloging microbial life on a research vessel near the edge of human space. Then the lights had gone out, and when they came back on, she was somewhere else entirely. A facility with no name, run by beings who did not officially exist, working on a project that was never supposed to have a witness. They called her useful. They called her a calibrator. What they meant was that she was raw material with a working brain, kept alive because the thing in the tank responded to her voice in ways it did not respond to anyone else. "It's stable," said the technician beside her, a narrow-faced Thessaric officer named Rin Ashari, his voice clipped through the translator collar around his throat. "Vitals normal. Neural activity climbing faster than projected." "That's not a good thing," Mara said quietly. "You know that, right? A brain that grows faster than you expect isn't a success story. It's a warning." Rin didn't answer. Nobody on this station answered questions like that anymore. They had learned, the way people always learn under men like Vel-Korath, that some questions were safer left in the dark. Korath entered the observation deck the way he entered every room, as if the walls themselves owed him their attention. Tall, gray-skinned, his uniform stripped of every compact insignia so that officially, this station and everyone on it did not exist. He stopped beside the tank and studied the creature floating within it, with the quiet satisfaction of a man admiring something he had built with his own hands. 7 years of failed templates, he said, mostly to himself. 7 years of half-formed minds that couldn't hold a coherent thought for longer than an hour. And then we tried human tissue. He smiled faintly. "Do you know why humans made such good raw material, Doctor?" Mara said nothing. She had learned not to answer rhetorical questions from men who enjoyed the sound of their own voice. "Adaptability," Korath continued anyway. "Your species doesn't just survive change. It rewrites itself around it. Give a human enough pressure and enough time, and it becomes whatever the moment demands. Soldier, hunter, killer, saint. We didn't design Nemesis to be strong. We designed it to become whatever it needs to become to win." He looked at her, and something behind his eyes was almost curious. "We simply gave it the right foundation to build from." "You didn't give it a foundation," Mara said before she could stop herself. "You gave it people. You said template mind like it's a blueprint. It's not a blueprint. Whoever those donors were, some part of them is still in there." Korath's expression didn't change. That was the worst part. He didn't even flinch. "The donors," he said, "were compensated with a quick death rather than a slow one. That is more mercy than most experiments receive." Mara turned away from him before he could see her face because she was afraid of what it would show. Rage, maybe. Or grief for people she had never met, whose names she didn't even know, whose last moments had been harvested and folded into the thing floating 3 feet away from her, silent and dreaming. The alarm came 4 hours later, in the dead hours of the station's artificial night cycle, while Mara was lying awake on the narrow cot in her cell, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about home. It wasn't the containment breach alarm. It was worse. A diagnostic failure alert, sharp and stuttering, the kind that meant something inside the tank room had stopped behaving the way it was supposed to. Guards moved past her cell in a rush of boots and clipped alien commands. Mara pressed herself to the small reinforced window in her door and watched them go, her heart hammering, and for one wild moment she let herself hope that something had finally gone wrong for the people who deserved it. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out entirely. In the dark, she heard something she would remember for the rest of her life. A long, low groan of metal bending from somewhere deep in the tank room, followed by the unmistakable shatter of reinforced glass. Then silence. The kind of silence that felt like something was listening. Down in the containment level, the technician Rin Ashari stood frozen in front of the ruined tank, fluid pooling around his boots, the emergency lights casting the room in flickering red. The restraints that had held the creature suspended for 6 months hung empty and torn. The thick cables snapped clean like thread. He turned slowly, scanning the dark room, his weapon raised with a hand that would not stop shaking. "Report!" Korath's voice snapped over the comm, cutting through the static. "Ashari, report. What happened to the subject?" Rin opened his mouth to answer. Something moved behind him. He spun, weapon raised, and for half a second, just half a second, he saw it clearly in the red emergency light, tall. Built wrong for anything born naturally. Too smooth in some places, too sharp in others. As if something had tried to sculpt a human shape out of instinct and muscle memory rather than bone. And the eyes. That was the part that would have haunted him, if he had lived long enough to be haunted. They weren't animal eyes. They were aware. The last thing Rin Ashari saw was recognition flicker across that alien human face, as though it were trying, in some buried fragment of itself, to remember what a person was supposed to look like, right before it decided he wasn't one. 3 decks above, Mara Voss sat in the dark of her cell, listening to the sound of the station's intercom crackling back to life, and Vel Korath's voice, no longer calm, filling every corridor at once. "Full lockdown," he said. "Every deck. Every exit sealed. The subject is loose." A pause. Mara held her breath. "And someone find the girl," Korath said. "If it's bonded to her the way the neural logs suggest, she may be the only thing that can stop it." Down the corridor, past 3 sealed bulkheads and a stairwell slick with something dark, a shape moved through the station's ventilation shafts with unnatural silence, following a scent, a heartbeat, a voice it had heard through glass for 6 months without ever being able to answer back. It was coming for her. And nobody, not Korath, not his soldiers, not the station itself, understood yet whether that meant Mara Voss was in more danger than anyone alive, or the only person on the station who was finally safe. The vent grill above Mara's cell buckled inward without a sound, and that was somehow more terrifying than if it had screamed. She scrambled back against the wall as the metal panel folded like paper, and a hand, too large, too strong, fingers tipped with something between claw and bone, reached down through the opening and gripped the edge of the frame. Mara didn't scream. She had spent 6 months learning that screaming only told the monsters where you were. The creature dropped into her cell in near total silence, folding its long frame to fit the low ceiling, and for 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. Mara pressed herself into the corner, her pulse roaring in her ears, waiting for the pain, waiting for the end. It didn't come. The creature tilted its head, studying her the way a man studies a word on the tip of his tongue that he cannot quite remember. Its chest rose and fell, too human emotion for something built to kill. Then slowly it reached toward her, not to strike but to touch 2 fingers against the side of her face, gentle enough that she felt more confusion than fear. "You know me," Mara whispered, before she could stop herself. "Don't you?" Something like a shudder ran through its body. A sound came out of its throat. Not a growl, not a word. Something in between, fractured and searching, as if it were trying to remember how a mouth was supposed to work. Then boots pounded in the corridor outside, and the moment shattered. The creature spun toward the door with a speed that blurred the air, placing its body between Mara and the entrance a heartbeat before 3 armed soldiers burst through it. What followed lasted 11 seconds. Mara counted them later, replaying it over and over in her mind, because 11 seconds was how long it took the creature to disable 3 trained compact soldiers without killing a single one of them. It didn't fight like an animal. It fought like something that had studied violence from every angle at once, disarming, redirecting, using their own momentum against them, precise enough that when it was over, all 3 men were unconscious on the floor, breathing, alive, and the creature stood over them without a mark on it. It looked at Mara again, waiting. "Why?" she breathed. "Didn't you kill them?" It didn't answer. It couldn't. But something in the way it watched her, patient and searching, told her the question mattered to it too. 3 decks up, in a command room stripped of every compact insignia, Vel Korath watched the security footage loop in horrified silence. "Run it again," he said. His aide, a thin, nervous officer named Dessa Prine, didn't move. "Sir, I don't think—" "Run it again." The footage played. The creature moving through armed resistance like water through fingers, sparing every human and compact life it could have taken in an instant. Korath's jaw tightened as the loop reached its end for the 4th time. "It's choosing," Dessa said quietly. "It had every opportunity to kill them. It chose not to." "It's malfunctioning," Korath snapped, though even he didn't sound convinced. "The neural template is unstable. It's confusing restraint for strategy." "Or," Dessa said, and then seemed to think better of finishing the sentence. "Say it, or the donor minds are still in there. Not just patterns, not just instinct. Actual pieces of who they were. Memory. Judgment." She hesitated. "Mercy." Korath turned away from the screen, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out the narrow viewport at the dead gray surface of the moon outside. For 7 years he had told himself, and everyone above him, that Project Nemesis was a weapon, a tool, nothing more, built from raw biological material that happened to originate from human donors. It was easier that way. Weapons didn't have to be treated like people. Weapons could be discarded, rebuilt, erased without guilt, but a weapon didn't spare its enemies. "Pull every donor file," he said finally. "I want to know exactly whose minds went into that thing. All of them." Dessa hesitated. "Sir, there were 41 donors in the final batch. Cross-referencing all of them will take—" "Do it anyway." His voice was flat, controlled, the sound of a man burying something before it could climb out of the ground on its own. "And seal every escape pod on this station. If that thing reaches an evacuation shuttle, it reaches human space. And if it reaches human space—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Down in the lower decks, Mara ran, and the creature moved beside her, matching her pace effortlessly, occasionally reaching out to guide her around corners a half-second before soldiers appeared, as though it could hear things through the walls that she couldn't. "You're protecting me," she said between breaths, ducking through a maintenance corridor thick with steam. "Why? What am I to you?" The creature made that same fractured sound again, low in its throat, almost like a word trying to form. Mara stopped running just for a moment and looked at it directly. "Do you have a name?" she asked. "Did they even give you one?" Nothing. Just those eyes, endlessly searching hers, as though the answer to her question was buried somewhere it couldn't reach. A hard clang echoed from the corridor behind them, a heavy bulkhead sealing shut, followed by another, and another, the sound rolling toward them like a wave. "They're locking down the whole station," Mara said, dread rising in her chest. "Section by section, they're trying to trap us." The creature's head snapped toward the sound, some instinct sharpening in its posture, and it began moving faster, half guiding, half pulling Mara down a narrower shaft toward the station's central spine, the massive vertical corridor that connected every deck. The only route Korath hadn't sealed yet, because sealing it would strand his own soldiers along with them. They reached the spine, just as the lighting along the entire station shuddered and died at once, every corridor plunging into blackness except for the dim red emergency strips running along the floor. Korath's voice came through every intercom simultaneously, low and cold, stripped of the calm authority it had carried since Mara first arrived. "Seal every exit," he said. "If it reaches the escape pods, humanity will learn we exist, and that cannot happen. I don't care what it takes." A pause, heavy with something that might have been regret, or might have simply been calculation. "Kill the girl if you must." Mara froze in the dark, the words settling into her chest like a stone. Beside her, the creature went utterly still. And then, for the first time since it had broken free of its tank, it made a sound that was unmistakably, unbearably human. It was a growl of pure fury, and it was pointed straight at the ceiling, straight at the sound of Korath's voice, as though some fractured part of it had understood every word and had already decided exactly what it intended to do about them. The first soldier never saw what hit him. The second one did for exactly half a second, and it was the last thing he ever saw. The station's central spine had become a killing ground. 4 squads of compact soldiers converging from opposite decks with orders to corner the creature and drag Mara Voss out alive if possible, dead if necessary. They had thermal scopes, coordinated fire patterns, sealed choke points. On paper, it was an unwinnable position for anything without air support. The creature didn't fight like it was reading from a script anymore. It fought like it was learning in real time, adjusting between one heartbeat and the next, and that was what terrified the soldiers most. Not its speed, not its strength, but the way it seemed to understand their tactics faster than they could execute them. A soldier fired a suppression burst down the corridor. The creature was already gone from where the shots landed, already moving along the ceiling supports, already behind them. Another soldier tried to flank through a side vent. The creature met him there first, having somehow predicted the exact route before he'd taken 3 steps into it. Mara pressed herself into an alcove near the spine's midpoint, watching through gaps in the chaos, and felt something twist in her chest that wasn't fear anymore. It was closer to awe, and beneath the awe, something rawer, recognition. She had read enough donor files smuggled from Rin Ashari's old terminal to know what this was. Not the training of a single soldier, not the instinct of a single killer. Layers of tactics, memory, and reflex from dozens of different minds, stacked and fused and fighting for control of one body. It wasn't a weapon anymore if it had ever truly been one. It was a crowd, trapped inside a single skin, and right now every voice in that crowd had agreed on one thing: protect her. A soldier broke from the chaos and lunged straight for Mara, weapon raised close enough that she could see the panic behind his visor. She didn't have time to run. The creature was faster. It slammed into the soldier from the side hard enough to send him into the bulkhead, and for one terrible instant Mara thought it would finally kill someone in front of her. Instead, it pinned him, disarmed him, and simply held him there, snarling into his visor until he stopped struggling, before letting him drop, unconscious but breathing, at her feet. "You keep doing that," Mara said, breathless, staring at the creature as it turned toward her, chest heaving. "Every single time you could kill them, you don't." The creature's throat worked. Another one of those broken, searching sounds escaping it, closer to speech now than it had been an hour ago, as though the fighting itself, the pressure of the moment, was sharpening whatever mind lived behind its eyes. "S," it managed, just a fragment of a sound. But it was the first sound resembling language it had made since escaping the tank, and Mara felt her breath catch in her throat. Before either of them could process it, a new voice cut through the chaos. Not a soldier's, not Korath's, but Dessa Prine's, broadcasting on an open frequency, shaking badly enough that her translator collar stuttered on every third word. "Dr. Voss, if you can hear this, the donor files. I pulled them like Korath ordered. You need to see them. Deck 4, Secondary Archive, Terminal Bay 2. I left it open. I don't think I can be part of this anymore." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of static, and underneath it, something that might have been Dessa being dragged away by her own security detail. Mara looked at the creature. "Deck 4, she said. "Can you get us there?" It nodded, an actual nod, deliberate, human, and something about that small gesture undid Mara more than anything else that had happened all night. They reached the archive 20 minutes later. Moving through service corridors and maintenance shafts, the creature seemed to navigate by instinct, as though some fragment of its assembled mind had memorized the station's blueprints before it ever woke. The archive itself was a narrow room lined with dormant terminals, one of them still glowing, exactly where Dessa had left it. Mara sat down and began to read, and the creature stood behind her, silent, watching the screen over her shoulder with an intensity that made her wonder how much of it understood what it was looking at. 41 names, 41 files, most of them stamped with the same clinical designation: deceased, donor extraction complete. But one file near the bottom of the list carried a different stamp, one that made Mara's stomach drop. Status: extraction incomplete, subject retained, template dominance 61%. The name attached to it was Ethan Cade, military service record, multiple commendations. Killed in action during a border skirmish 3 years prior. Except, according to this file, he hadn't died at all. He had been recovered, barely alive, and quietly diverted into Project Nemesis before his family had ever been told the truth. Mara turned slowly to look at the creature standing behind her, and for the first time she wasn't looking at a weapon, or an experiment, or even a fused chorus of the dead. She was looking at a man who had never been allowed to finish dying, wearing a body built to make sure he never could. "Ethan?" she said quietly, testing the word. The creature went rigid. Its eyes widened, and for one raw, unguarded moment, something behind them cracked open. Recognition, grief, 6 months of buried humanity surfacing all at once, so violently that it staggered back a step and pressed one clawed hand against the wall to steady itself. Somewhere behind them, alarms shrieked to life again, and Korath's voice thundered through the intercom, no longer measured, no longer calm. "They've reached the archive," he snarled. "Seal Deck 4. All of it. If we can't recover the asset, we destroy the evidence." A pause, cold and final. "Initiate station self-destruct. 10-minute countdown. Let the moon bury what we built." The archive door hissed and began grinding shut on its own, sealing them inside with the truth Mara had just uncovered, and a 10-minute clock now ticking somewhere deep in the station's bones. Mara grabbed the creature's arm, Ethan's arm, and felt it flinch beneath her hand, still raw from what it had just learned about itself. "We have to move," she said. "Now. Whatever you are, whoever you were, I am not dying in this room, and neither are you." The creature looked at her, something fierce and newly awake burning behind its eyes, and turned toward the ceiling door with a growl that sounded, for the very first time, less like an animal and more like a man who had just remembered exactly what he was willing to die protecting. The countdown clock on the archive wall read 8 minutes and 40 seconds when the creature tore the sealed door off its frame with both hands, metal screeching, and Mara realized she had stopped thinking of it as the creature at all. "Ethan," she said again, testing how it felt against her tongue while they ran. "If any part of you understands me, I need you to help me get us out of here." He didn't answer in words. He didn't need to. He moved through the collapsing station with a certainty that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with memory, cutting through service corridors that weren't on any map Mara had seen, as though some buried part of him had walked these halls before, in dreams he couldn't have known he was having. They found shelter 3 decks down, in a maintenance alcove shielded from the worst of the station's shuddering as the self-destruct sequence armed itself deeper in the hull. For a moment, with alarms wailing distantly and the countdown eating away at the minutes they had left, they simply sat, side by side, breathing. "You died," Mara said quietly. 3 years ago, border skirmish. Your file said killed in action. Your family probably has a grave with your name on it and nothing underneath." Something moved behind Ethan's eyes, pained and distant, like a man trying to remember a dream that kept sliding out of reach the moment he grasped it. He lifted one clawed hand and pressed it gently against his own chest, over where a heart would be if his body still had one shaped like the one he was born with. "I know it hurts," Mara said. "I know none of this is fair, but you're still in there. Whatever they did to the rest of you, the 61% the file called it, that's still you underneath everything else." She hesitated. "Do you remember anything? Before the tank?" His throat worked, and this time when the sound came, it wasn't fractured. It wasn't perfect either, rough, halting, dragged up from somewhere that hadn't spoken in years, but it was unmistakably a word. "Home," he said. Mara's breath caught. You remember home? His eyes closed, and for a moment his whole body trembled, not with rage this time, but with something achingly close to grief. Images seemed to flicker behind his expression, though Mara couldn't see them. Flashes of memory bleeding through whatever fused, fractured architecture the compact scientist had built inside his skull. A woman's laugh, a dinner table, the particular gray light of a planet that wasn't this one. They're not just yours, Mara said slowly, piecing it together as she spoke. The other donors, 40 of them, folded into you along with your own memories. That's why you fight the way you do, not one soldier's instincts, but dozens layered on top of each other. That's why you spared those men back there instead of killing them. Somewhere in that crowd of minds, someone believed mercy still mattered. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at her, and for the first time since the tank had shattered, his expression held something unmistakably whole. Not blank animal awareness, not fractured confusion, but a man looking at another human being and understanding, completely, that she saw him. The countdown clock on the wall blinked past 5 minutes. We need a way off this station, Mara said, forcing herself back toward practicality before the moment could undo her entirely. Escape pods, Korath sealed them. A new voice interrupted, weak and static-laced, crackling through a nearby wall panel that hadn't been fully destroyed. Dessa Prine's voice, barely audible. Base 6, she rasped. Escape pod Base 6, override code 719 Kesh. I unlocked it before they took my access. It's the only one Korath didn't get to in time. Please, get out, both of you. Dessa, Mara said urgently, pressing her palm to the panel as though it might somehow bring her closer. Come with us. Silence stretched a beat too long. I can't, Dessa finally said, voice cracking. I'm 3 decks from you, and there isn't time, and even if there were... She stopped herself. Someone from the inside needs to survive long enough to make sure the compact hears the truth about what Korath did here. Go, now, please. The line went dead before Mara could argue further, and grief she had no time to process settled cold and heavy in her chest. Ethan was already moving, pulling her gently but firmly toward the corridor leading to Base 6, some protective urgency in him overriding everything else. They ran through decks buckling under their own emergency structural failures, past abandoned checkpoints where soldiers had clearly fled toward their own escape routes rather than continue hunting a creature that had already proven it could not be caught. They were 50 meters from the escape bay when Vel Korath stepped out of the smoke to block their path, flanked by the last 4 soldiers still loyal enough or frightened enough to follow him into a dying station. He looked different than he had at the start of all this. His composure fractured, his uniform scorched at one shoulder, but his eyes still carried that same cold, calculating certainty that had built Project Nemesis in the first place. Ethan Cade, Korath said, testing the name like Mara had, though his tone held nothing but contempt. So the doctor found your file. How touching. He raised his weapon, not at Ethan, but at Mara. Here is what's going to happen. You will order the asset to stand down, or I will put a round through your skull and see whether the other 40 donor minds care as much about you as this one apparently does. Ethan's entire body went rigid, a low growl building in his throat, every instinct in him screaming toward violence. And Mara saw with sudden horrifying clarity that if Korath pulled that trigger, whatever remained of Ethan Cade's humanity might shatter completely, leaving only the weapon the compact had always wanted underneath. Don't, she said quickly to both of them at once. Ethan, don't. This is exactly what he wants. He needs you to lose control so he has an excuse to erase whatever's left of you. Korath's smile was thin and humorless. Clever girl, but it won't matter. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small device, its surface etched with compact military markings Mara didn't recognize, a single indicator light blinking a slow, patient red. This station may fall. Project Nemesis may escape my custody tonight. But I will not let a weapon capable of what I just witnessed reach human space with a mind of its own. His thumb hovered over the device's activation switch. A neural suppressor, calibrated specifically to the template's dominant signature. One press, and Ethan Cade goes back to being exactly what he was always supposed to be. Nothing. Ethan's growl deepened into something closer to a roar, torn between the urge to protect Mara and the paralyzing terror of what Korath held in his hand. And in that frozen, agonizing standoff, with the countdown clock somewhere behind them ticking past 3 minutes, Vel'Karath's thumb began, slowly and deliberately, to descend toward the switch. The suppressor's light turned from red to white, and Ethan Cade screamed. It wasn't the roar of a monster. It was the sound of a man being torn apart from the inside. 40 other voices ripped away from him all at once, and Mara watched in horror as he collapsed to his knees. Clawed hands pressed against his skull, his whole body convulsing under a wave of silence where a crowd of stolen minds used to live. Korath watched with the calm satisfaction of a man finally seeing his life's work behave. There, he said quietly. No loyalty, no mercy, no Ethan Cade at all. Just the animal underneath, exactly as designed. He gestured to his remaining soldiers. Restrain it, carefully. We may still salvage something useful from the wreckage. Mara didn't think. She threw herself between the approaching soldiers and Ethan's shuddering body, arms spread, voice raw. Don't touch him. Move, Doctor, Korath said almost gently, the way a man speaks to someone he considers already defeated. You cannot save something that no longer exists. He exists, Mara snapped. You just tried to erase him and he's still fighting it. Look at him. She dropped to her knees beside Ethan, gripping his shoulders, forcing him to face her despite the tremors racking his body. Ethan, look at me. I know you're in there. I know it hurts. Please, stay with me. For a long, terrible moment, there was nothing behind his eyes but pain, glassy and unfocused, the look of a mind drowning. Mara felt something break inside her chest, grief rising fast and merciless, and she was distantly aware of Korath's soldiers closing in around them, weapons raised, waiting only for his order. Then Ethan's hand closed around her wrist. Weak, trembling, but deliberate. His eyes found hers, and though the light in them was dimmer than before, fractured at the edges, something recognizable was still burning underneath. Not the tactical intelligence of 40 fused minds anymore, but something smaller, rawer, and somehow stronger for it. A single will, refusing to be switched off. Still, he rasped. The word dragged up from somewhere impossibly deep. Here. Korath's expression flickered, the first genuine crack of uncertainty Mara had seen in him since this nightmare began. That's not possible, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. The suppressor severs the dominant neural pathway completely. There should be nothing left capable of. You built him out of people who refused to die quietly, Mara said, rising to her feet, putting herself fully between Korath and Ethan now, unarmed and furious and unwilling to move. Soldiers, survivors. Every single donor you harvested was someone who fought to the very last second of their life. You didn't just give him their memories, you gave him their stubbornness. Did you really think one switch would be enough to erase that? Something shifted in Korath's face, doubt threading through his certainty for the first time. And in that moment of hesitation, Ethan moved. He surged upright with a speed that defied everything his trembling body had suggested a second earlier, closing the distance to Korath before the soldiers could react, driving the suppressor device from his hand with a single brutal strike that sent it skittering across the deck, sparking, its light flickering erratically between white and dead. The soldiers opened fire. Ethan twisted through the barrage with instinct rather than calculation now. No longer the calm, tactical genius of before, but something rawer, more desperate, fighting purely on the strength of whatever fragment of self had survived Korath's device. He took a hit to the shoulder, staggered, kept moving, disarmed one soldier, then a second, his movements ragged but unwilling to stop. Mara grabbed the fallen suppressor from the deck, staring at its damaged casing, its lights stuttering weakly. An idea, desperate and reckless, sparked in her mind. Ethan, she shouted over the chaos, I need 30 seconds, buy me 30 seconds. He didn't ask why. He simply turned and put his body between her and the remaining soldiers, absorbing a blow meant for her, grunting in pain, but not falling. Mara's hands moved fast over the device's cracked interface. Years of xenobiology and reluctant weeks spent studying compact neural architecture finally proving useful for something other than helping build a monster. The suppressor hadn't fully discharged. Ethan's strike had interrupted the sequence before completion, leaving the device holding a fraction of its stored neural energy, still active, still connected to whatever remained of the dominant template signature. If it could sever a mind, she realized, hands trembling, maybe, just maybe, it could be forced to do the opposite. "I'm sorry if this hurts," she whispered, and reversed the polarity on the device's core, redirecting its remaining charge back toward Ethan instead of away from him, flooding the connection instead of severing it. Ethan convulsed the instant the device activated, crying out, dropping to one knee amid the fighting, and for one horrifying second Mara feared she had just finished what Korath started. Then his eyes snapped open and they were different. Not one voice anymore, not the calm, focused intelligence of the tactical hybrid mind, and not the single desperate flicker of Ethan alone. Something fuller, something whole. 41 minds, unified rather than fractured, speaking through him at once in a way that didn't shatter him but completed him. Decades of stolen lives finally finding a way to exist together instead of apart. He rose to his feet slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried an echo none of them had heard from him before. Layered, resonant, unmistakably many, and unmistakably one. "You built a weapon," Ethan said, and it was his voice, but it was also the voices of a mother, a soldier, a scientist, a child. 41 lives Korath had thought were nothing more than raw material. "You forgot people don't stay weapons. Not humans." Korath backed away, his remaining soldiers scattered or fallen, his composure finally completely broken. "Impossible," he breathed. "The template was never designed to unify. It was designed to obey." "You designed the body," Ethan said, advancing slowly, each step deliberate, unstoppable. "You never understood what you put inside it." Korath's hand shook as he reached for a sidearm, some final desperate instinct for self-preservation overriding whatever composure he had left. The countdown clock on the wall behind him blinked past 90 seconds, the station structure groaning under the strain of its own imminent destruction. "If I die," Korath said, weapon raised, voice shaking with something between fury and fear, "everyone will still know what humanity really is underneath the civility. A species of monsters wearing kindness like a mask. I built proof of that with my own hands." Ethan stopped in front of him, close enough now that the weapon trembled inches from his chest, and for the first time since the tank had broken open, something almost like sorrow crossed his fractured, many-voiced face. "No," he said quietly. "You built proof of something else entirely. You just never wanted to see it." The station shuddered violently around them, alarms shrieking, the countdown collapsing toward its final seconds, and somewhere in the chaos, Vel Korath's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot never landed. Ethan moved faster than the trigger could finish its pull, closing the last inches between them and driving the weapon aside with one hand, while the other caught Korath by the collar, lifting him half off his feet with strength that no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. For a moment, the two of them simply stared at each other. The man who had built a weapon out of stolen lives, and the weapon who had just discovered he was still a man. "Do it," Korath said, breathless, strangely calm now that the end had finally arrived. "Prove me right. Show them what you really are." Ethan's grip tightened, and Mara, watching from a few feet away with the ruined suppressor still in her hands, felt her heart stop, certain for one terrible second that Korath would get exactly the ending he wanted. Then Ethan let him go. Korath crumpled to the deck, gasping, more confused than relieved, staring up at the creature he'd built as though the mercy made no sense to him at all. "You spent 7 years trying to prove humanity was just violence wearing a better costume," Ethan said, his voice still carrying that strange layered resonance, 41 lives speaking through one throat. "The easiest way to prove yourself wrong would have been to let me become what you expected. I'd rather be the answer to your question than the mistake you're hoping for." The countdown clock behind them blinked past 30 seconds, the station groaning, sections of the ceiling beginning to buckle under the strain of the self-destruct sequence, finally reaching its final stage. "We have to go," Mara shouted over the noise, grabbing Ethan's arm. "Now. All of this doesn't matter if we die here." Ethan looked down at Korath one last time, something unreadable in his expression, and then turned away, leaving him lying on the deck as the station began to tear itself apart around them. They ran the final stretch to Bay 6 together, Ethan half carrying Mara over debris and buckled flooring, the override code Dessa had given them working on the first try, the airlock hissing open to reveal a small, battered escape pod that looked entirely too fragile for what they were about to survive. Mara scrambled inside first, hands already moving over the unfamiliar controls, adrenaline burning away the exhaustion that had been building in her for 6 months. Ethan hesitated at the threshold for half a second, glancing back down the corridor toward the deeper decks of the station, toward wherever Korath had been left behind. "Ethan," Mara said sharply. "Now." He climbed in beside her, folding his too large frame into the too small seat, and the pod's doors sealed shut, just as the first major explosion rocked the station's lower levels. The launch sequence fired hard enough to press them both back into their seats, the pod tearing free of the dying station and hurtling out into open space. And through the small viewport, Mara watched the black site facility that had been her prison for half a year fold in on itself in a silent, brilliant flash, swallowed by its own destruction, taking Velkorath and whatever remained of Project Nemesis's original secrets down with it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The pod drifted, alarms finally quiet, the vast dark of space stretching endlessly beyond the glass. "You didn't kill him," Mara said eventually softly. "Korath, you had every reason to." Ethan was quiet for a moment, staring out at the stars, his expression calmer now than she had ever seen it. 41 people live in here," he said. "Soldiers, scientists, a teacher, I think, somewhere near the back. None of them wanted to die the way they did, but not one of them wanted to become the excuse for what he was trying to prove either." He looked at her. "You said it yourself back in the archive. He built a weapon from people. He just never understood that people don't stop being people, no matter how many pieces you cut them into." Mara reached out and rested her hand over his, and for the first time since the tank had shattered, he didn't flinch away from the contact. 3 months later, Mara Voss stood in a quiet civilian memorial garden on the outskirts of a research colony on the edge of human space. 41 names engraved into a simple stone marker in front of her. Ethan Cade's name among them, despite the fact that he was standing right beside her, very much alive. The rescue shuttle that found their drifting pod had brought with it compact investigators, furious and disbelieving in equal measure, and Mara's testimony, backed by data Dessaprine had smuggled out before her own capture, and later, miraculously, her own survival and rescue, had been enough to expose Velkorath's Black Site project to the wider galactic community. The fallout had been immediate and severe. The Compact, publicly humiliated by one rogue faction's atrocities, had issued formal condemnations, reparations, investigations that would likely take years to complete. None of it brought back the 40 humans whose lives had been stripped down to raw material. But it was something, a beginning at least of the galaxy being forced to reckon with what had been done in the dark. "They still don't know what to make of you," Mara said, glancing at Ethan. Officially, he existed in Compact records now as a recovered prisoner of war, a designation that satisfied no one but at least gave him a legal existence outside the wreckage of Project Nemesis. "The delegates who came to interview you, I watched them. They're terrified and fascinated in equal measure." "They should be terrified," Ethan said, a faint, tired smile crossing his face. "They spent 7 years trying to build the most efficient killer they could imagine, and what they got instead was 41 people who refused to stop being human even after everything was taken from them." He looked out at the horizon, the colony's twin suns beginning to set. "Maybe that's worth being afraid of. Not what we can do, what we won't." A delegation of alien representatives approached from across the garden, quiet and cautious, keeping a respectful distance from the memorial. One of them, an elder Thessaric diplomat with silver-threaded robes, inclined her head toward Mara and Ethan in a gesture that looked almost like an apology. "Word is spreading," the diplomat said carefully, her translator collar smoothing her words into careful, formal human speech. "Across a dozen systems now, not just what was done to your people, what your people did even after everything was done to them." She paused. "There is a saying forming already, among those who have heard the full account. That humanity cannot be made, only earned." Mara looked at Ethan, and he looked back at her, something quiet and steady passing between them that needed no translation at all. That night, alone in the small colony quarters they had been given, Mara found Ethan sitting by the window, staring out at the stars with an expression she had come to recognize. The look of a man listening to voices only he could hear, 40 other lives murmuring somewhere beneath his own, quieter now, more at peace than they had been in years. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, sitting beside him, "if there's more like you out there? Other templates, other projects the Compact hasn't found yet?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his reflection faint and layered in the dark glass, 41 faces folded into one. "I used to be afraid of that question," he said finally. "Now I hope it's true." He turned to look at her, something resolute settling behind his eyes. "Because if it is, then somewhere out there someone else like me is still fighting to remember who they were before someone else decided what they'd become." He reached out and took her hand, and together they sat in silence watching the stars, two survivors of something the galaxy was only just beginning to understand. That humanity, even broken apart and rebuilt into something never meant to be a person again, would always somehow find its way back to being exactly that.